This was a moment 56 years in the making. The April handshake between Barack Obama and his Cuban counterpart, Raul Castro. A gesture of hope to end the acrimony that spanned 11 American presidencies. But the Castros weren't always the enemy. In April 1959, just 3 months after completing his revolutionary march from Cuba's mountains to its seat of power, Fidel Castro came to Washington, hoping for a fresh start and economic help. He met with senators and laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. But President Eisenhower snubbed him, going on a golfing holiday instead of sitting down with Castro. Things went downhill from there. Castro soon took over U.S.-owned properties in Cuba and raised taxes on American goods. The U.S. retaliated, slashing trade with Cuba, leading to the full embargo that lasts to this day.
Duck and cover under the table.
And amid Cold War tensions and fear of communism bordering on hysteria, Castro strengthened ties with the Soviet Union. In 1961, the U.S. severed diplomatic relations. But before that, in 1960, President Eisenhower had already asked the CIA to plan covert operations to overthrow Fidel Castro. A debacle was soon to follow. The Bay of Pigs invasion, launched by President Kennedy in 1961 and led by CIA-trained Cuban exiles. Its failure boosted Castro's standing at home and abroad.
Basically said, thank you for the Bay of Pigs. You have transformed us from an aggrieved little country into an equal in the eyes of the world, and you have allowed us to consolidate the revolution.
Havana and Moscow grew closer, hatching a plan to build a Soviet missile base on the island.
This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba.
The discovery touched off the Cuban Missile Crisis, 2 weeks on the brink of nuclear annihilation. It ended with a deal. The missile sites would be dismantled if the United States pledged not to invade Cuba. Cuban exiles poured into South Florida. They hated Castro and his moves to nationalize many of Cuba's privately held assets. Their political power in the U.S. meant no American president dared cross the hard line they drew on Cuba policy. Until now, in secret talks brokered by Pope Francis, President Obama secured the release of American Alan Gross, imprisoned in Cuba for 5 years.
Welcome home, Alan. We're glad you're here.
In exchange, Mr. Obama agreed to return the 3 remaining members of the Cuban Five, a band of convicted spies. Suddenly, after 56 years, the time was ripe for change.
Now we have arrived at the moment that will be Barack Obama's legacy, the actual restoration of normal diplomatic relations. There's still a long road towards normal overall relations, but we have arrived at a milestone today.
Mike Viquera, Al Jazeera, Washington.